What happens to your digital life when you're gone? In this episode, I'm joined by David Edey, author of Executor Help and the host of Executor Help Podcast. With over 35 years in the financial planning industry, specializing in estate and legacy planning, David brings both professional expertise and a deeply personal experience after spending 7 years in court settling his own parents' estate. Today's conversation focuses on something most families overlook: your digital legacy. In today's episode, you'll learn why your email is the key to over 100 digital identities, how being unprepared can open the door to identity theft, and simple, actionable steps to protect your loved ones from cleaning up your digital mess. From passwords to social media to online banking, if it lives online, it really does need a plan. This episode will help you think beyond your estate plan and start securing the digital side of your legacy. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. David Edey, welcome to the Legacy of Love podcast. I'm so happy you're here with me.
Sarah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited because we're talking about legacy. That's what I'm all about, is trying to help people create that legacy and leave a legacy of love and order, is what I like to say.
Yeah. The beautiful piece, I think, of podcasting is that as professionals, we get to connect, across even internationally, which is very
Absolutely.
cool.
Look at us. We are international. Yes, we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So isn't that wonderful? Well, as we start off the conversation, I have to start off with asking you, you've been doing this work for over 3 decades. What
Closer to
originally
four
brought you to
now.
this work? Almost 4, yeah.
Almost 4 decades now. Yes. For me, in this part of my life now, it started when I was sitting on a cold courtroom bench. I was listening to a judge and some lawyers determine the fate of my parents' assets that we didn't end up holding on to. I lost my parents to cancer within a year of each other, and that changed my life forever. And not only was it losing them, but it was the staggering total settled their estate. It took 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 in lawyers' fees to sell their estate.
Wow.
All the stress that I went through drove me to a health crisis. I ended up having triple bypass surgery. And it was when I was in the hospital thinking about all of the legal battles and the personal turmoil that I was going through, I came to realization that our family was utterly unprepared. We were unprepared for following my parents' will and their wishes. We weren't prepared to confront the inevitability of death and how it was going to affect the family. And we were also grappling with the loss of losing my parents. And I've come to find out that this story is happening in a lot of families. It's a subject that a lot of people don't want to talk about because they're afraid if they talk about it, the loss is going to become a reality. But I also come to find out that everybody's got a story of their own, or they know where there's been a damaging family fight where there's, and it's all come about because no one wanted to talk. There was silence. And so now part of my work is to help break the cycle of silence, transform the way we think about, talk about, and prepare for death so that we're comfortable and understand that when we prepare, we're going to have some peace. If we've got a plan, there's going to be security in the family. And most importantly, that we have some open conversations so that there's some clarity of how we move forward after a loss. And if we can do that, we're going to help our families not be disorganized or in chaos. Because the one thing that I've learned, that everything that I've gone through, my journey, that's taught me that the most profound legacy that we're going to leave is not going to be the money, it's not going to be the possessions that we have, but what we can do to have conversations, the difficult conversations with our families now, and even though we dread it, but also have the conversations that they're going to be open and hopefully allow us to pass on to the next generation. I know that was a long-winded answer, but that's pretty much in a nutshell where I'm at and how we ended up here.
Wow. I'm so sorry. What a heartbreaking story. Was your family torn apart? I'm assuming if things were going on for 7 years that there was fighting and litigation and, oh,
There's three of us, and we've no longer spent the holidays together since 2011 when my parents passed away, 2011 and 2012. So we haven't spent the holidays together.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. We come to this work. It sounds like kind of coming to the same conclusions, right? I love that. We're preaching to the choir with each other. But I'm sorry to hear that, you personally know this. I mean, that pain is just so real. And I know you also know Cindy Arledge, and she also personally has that story,
Yes.
right? Of
Yeah.
her and her brother are no longer speaking. So I mean, that's so much of also what inspired kind of the name of this podcast, of leaving a legacy of love.
But what I would say is, because you mentioned Cindy, and I've had conversations with her. And what I found with other people is on my podcast, I've come to the realization that all families are messy.
Yes.
Families are just messy in different degrees. A lot of times people will, oh, that's not a problem for us because we get along at the holidays, and we sing and we tell jokes, and everybody has teases each other. But all it takes is for a matriarch or patriarch to mom and dad not to be there. There's a death in the family, or grandmother, and you start to see people's true colors. I like to say you
Yeah.
really don't know about somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. And
No.
you find out people change, and people handle grief differently, but they also handle the dynamics of how the family is going to go move forward. And if we put money into the mix, then all bets are off.
Yeah, I know. And unfortunately, we both have seen that. We know that personally and professionally. Again, that's where I think having more of these conversations, and you say it a little differently than me, but yeah, maybe your way's a little nicer. What I say is all families are dysfunctional.
Sarah, they're messy.
They're messy.
You
Yeah.
want to say dysfunction? I'm just going to say messy. That's where we're
It's
at
messy.
now. There's very degrees of messiness. We could be clinical and say they're dysfunction. No, they're messy. And that's how I ended up writing my book. And when I was having conversations with, a mediator doing the research, he was talking about, and at that point, again, the word messy never came into my vocabulary, but it was, he was telling me stories about how before it was families would fight over parents' estates when they were gone. And now it's come to the point where families are fighting over estates while the parents are alive. They're upset because, we got baby boomers spending their money to do whatever they want. They can go wherever. And the children see this as, hey, you're spending my inheritance. And that's going to become a problem going forward in the next few years, because between Canada and the US, it's believed there's going to be over $1 trillion that's going to be passed from one generation to the next generation over the next 10 years. And, the families that are dysfunctional or messy, there's going to be problems because the majority of them haven't had tough conversations, and the majority of them don't have any will or sort of estate plan, legacy plan in place.
Are the statistics about the same in Canada? I know it's 1 in 3 people have an estate plan in the US. Is it
Yeah,
it's about the
we're
same?
about the
Yeah.
same. Yeah. So, not having the plan, we can get away from that tsunami of wealth transfer that's coming.
Well, I'm pretty sure, with this point you'd agree on this, but from all the conversations that I've had on this podcast, what I really see is that the estate plan is just the starting point. There's so much more that we can do to set up our loved ones, set up ourselves. So much of it is the willingness to have the difficult conversation. And, what I really see is that we need to move away from just looking at the estate plan as just check it off the box, of things to do. And we've done it once, that these are really living documents. And the successful families are the ones that are continuing to have these conversations, because our wishes and our lives are going to be changing and evolving over the years. So this is something that we're sitting down at the family dinner table regularly. And then of course there's, the example too in California. For the most part, most people want to set up a trust, and a trust isn't funded. The beneficiary designations weren't done and updated, the accounts weren't updated, the house wasn't transferred into the trust, and then you wind up back to where, what we wanted to avoid in the first place, of having to go to probate court. So that's where I think that there's so much more than just the estate plan. And yes, we do need to get the estate plan in place, but that's just the beginning. I'm assuming you're
I
you're
totally
seeing
agree
this
with you.
too,
It's
right?
because, I advocate for, yes, you have to have a will. That's a starting point. But you can't say, okay, that's it. And there's so many other things that have to take place, because if you don't have the conversations, you're letting the paperwork do the talking for you. And that may not, people are going to misinterpret that paperwork. So it drives me crazy. People say, oh, I got my will, so I'm good. I'm like, really? And so my next question is, have you prepared your executor?
Yeah.
Have you had the conversations with your family? And they're like, oh, well, I have my will. Well, no, that's just part of the box, and the boxes that you have to check off. So yes, you've got the will. So that's the starting point, because by you taking those steps, you're saying to the government, no, I'm looking after this. I'm not going to die intestate, or I'm not going to leave my family
Mhm.
disorganized in chaos because there's no will. So that's taken care of. So the next step is, okay, how do I prepare my executor? Because now you're asking someone to take a big favor. You're asking them to spend 100 hours, between 18 to 24 months, to settle an estate. In my case, it was 7 years. You're asking someone to take on that responsibility. And the majority of the time, most people have no idea what it means to be an executor. They don't know where to start. So not only do you have them, if it's a family member, where it's most of the time it is, so most of the time you have someone you've asked them to take on this big responsibility. And the first thing you're also wanting them to do is deal with the grief of you being lost. So you've got the grief, and then you've got the business side to it. And, the testator, person who's created the will, they haven't had that conversation with their executor. So now you haven't had the conversation with the executor. They're in charge of the estate. So they've got to, deal with the tax department. They've got to deal with, the accounting. They've got to sell the house. There's so many things that they've got to do. And they've got to deal with the family messiness, because the beneficiaries, they're not interested in, what the executor do. They're not interested in the job. They're only interested in, where's my check?
Yes.
So if you haven't taken the time to keep them abreast of what's going on, have those conversations. Hey, this is what's going on with the estate. It doesn't take long for the beneficiaries to look sideways at you and say, hey, I'm not hearing anything's going on. They're up to something. So the next thing you know, they might, want to go to court and have you removed, or they just want to get into a lot of fights. The bottom line is, there has to be a lot of conversations. Yes, I've got my will. I have to prepare my executor, have to have a conversation with them. I want to make sure that they've got all the paperwork, or they know if something was to happen, they know where to go. And then I also have to have a conversation with my family. These are my wishes, in my healthcare directives, all of these things. I want you to understand what I want. They may not like it. It doesn't matter. It's your estate. You can do anything you want, but you need to have those conversations. And I find that a lot of families, I'm talking to a friend right now, her brother's in charge of the estate, and her mom and dad are getting older, but they lean on her to do the day-to-day things. Take me to the doctor, take me to the chiropractor, all of these things, come over and take care of me. But when the difficult decisions come, they're leaving it to the brother. And the brother is thinking, well, if mom and dad are sick, I'm going to keep them alive as much as possible. Whereas they have told the daughter, my friend, no, we don't want to be kept alive. And I said, you need to have, the parents have to have the conversation with the son. Oh, no, nobody wants to talk about it. I said, well, then this is just a ticking time bomb, and this is not going to get any better.
It'll require a crisis to have the conversation. And that's when
Yeah.
tensions are high. And it's just, that's where, if we're coming to this proactively, it can be just such a world of difference, right?
Yeah, I like to say that intensive care is no place to find out that there's no will,
Oh,
and you never can have a meaningful
no.
conversation with anybody when they're on a respirator.
Yeah.
So you need to have conversations in advance. You need to prepare. Spoiler alert, we're all going to die. So you need to figure out, how do you want to leave that legacy of love? Do you want to leave a legacy, or do you want to leave a mess?
I couldn't agree more. Well, David, I think this is going to go nicely into kind of the next part of, our conversation. So much of why I wanted you here and I jumped on it was really talking about digital assets and our digital legacy.
This honestly is where I think it just takes, as a professional, just constant kind of staying, abreast of what's going on. Anyways, before we get into that, let's just define for listeners, what would you consider a digital legacy or digital assets?
It would be anything that you've ever created or done that's online. So when it comes to digital assets, if we think about it, for every one email address, there's probably about 130 to 160 digital identities related to that email address, which would be Amazon, your online banking. What else? There's YouTube, your Gmail, your email. All of those things are all related to your email address. And if we don't have the executor or a family member doesn't have access to the logins and the passwords, those digital assets, then you've created another problem, especially when it comes to social media. A friend of mine, she passed away 3 years ago. And I can tell that her husband, who's the executor, he doesn't know her social media protocol. He doesn't know the logins and passwords, because it was a couple of weeks ago, it posted, hey, it's her birthday. All of those things are still being, going out. Whereas when it comes to social media, each company has its own protocol in terms of how to shut down an account. So you need to learn, find out, or make it easy for the executor or a family member to have access to those logins and passwords to shut them down. And it also could lead to identity theft. If someone knows that someone's passed away, they could use the name and see it digitally and use their name somewhere else and catfish people with it. So digital assets are something that people have to be cognizant about, because they really don't think about it. And they also take it one step further. Suppose you have a business. So now you've got a whole set of business logins and passwords, and you also got your personal logins and passwords. What happens to the business if we don't know what the logins and passwords for that? Say you have online banking and you have certain payments going through your mortgage and that sort of stuff like that, and there's not enough money in the bank to cover it because you don't know how to transfer it back and forth. That can lead to problems as well. So digital assets is probably one of the biggest things that people have to think about when it comes to their estate plan, that they have to be cognizant and aware of, to make sure that it's taken care of efficiently, because it can lead to problems. It's also, we have the rise of cryptocurrency and NFTs and those sort of things like that. Again, if there's no direction of how to get into those particular types of accounts, it becomes another problem for the executor or the family member going forward, especially if there's assets there.
Yeah, with crypto, I think also, just because I'm based in Silicon Valley, I don't even question, if it will be something that I'll have to administer. It's just about when will that happen. And, from my understanding, crypto cannot be titled in a trust. It has to
Yeah.
be only for an individual. So with, large assets, we're in Silicon Valley, I've had a few consults with people where they've had 20 plus million in cryptocurrency. And I'm like, I'm not your person. Like, I don't feel equipped to manage that estate.
But when you have that conversation with them, have they given any thought to if something was to happen?
Yes. Usually when people are, reaching out to me, they're already working with an estate planning attorney. And so they're figuring out the plan and trying to kind of see if I'm part of that plan. At this point in time, with a large amount of crypto, I wouldn't be comfortable, accepting that. But, we'll see.
Most people haven't got the 20 million or so in the crypto, but most people have just some basic, Facebook, Instagram, and they've got all of those logins and passwords,
Yes.
digital assets that they need to take care of. And most people don't think about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. With just your expertise, is your recommendation to have like a LastPass account? So kind of like the master password, or sharing each, password with your family or your executor trustee?
I'm old school. I'd like to have everything written out. So, I would like it to be written out, the passwords, so that along with all the other important information, contact information, who's the accountant, the insurance, financial advisor, all of that important information, along with the will, be kept in a brightly colored envelope so that if something was to happen, the executor or the family member that you trust, you let them know if something was to happen, look for that bright orange envelope. Because when there's an emergency like this, people are traumatized, and you can't find anything when people are traumatized because they say, oh, I got to find the will. I got to find it. They don't know where to start. So try and alleviate that problem by saying, you know what, if something was ever to happen, look for that bright orange envelope. It's in the thing, and everything that you're going to need is in there, and make it easier on them. Like I said, people are traumatized. They're stressed. They don't know what to do, where to start. They're panicking, and they're looking all over. I had a friend. He came to find out that his parents didn't have a will. His dad died suddenly in a car accident, and his mom had a stroke. And for 6 months, they were trying to talk to her, find out. And there were 5 siblings searching all over the house, trying to find if there was a will. They came to find out that they didn't have a will. So then that came to a whole other family messiness. So make it easy on your family to find that important information. Let your executor know or let a family member know.
I think you brought up just a great point, just going back to having a bright colored folder, like there's one area in the house. I think organization is such a big part of this, right? If we're, as the executor or trustee is coming in and, the house is a mess, who knows where things are stored, or they're all throughout the house. And then also some documents in a safety deposit box, that's going to leave things really confusing and messy. It's probably going to take, months and hours to kind of piece together what the plan was and how to take over. So that's again where I don't know if I feel like less attorneys are really having this level of kind of, practical advice of, the realities of when you're administering an estate. And I think there's an assumption that people just know this. And usually once people find out, it's too late, right? It's after the fact. It's once mom and dad have passed away, or once mom and dad are incapacitated. And then you're just like left with, oh my goodness, what now? What did we want? Where are the documents? Oh, we know that they met with some attorney. Who was that person? Who knows? We can't locate it. And so I think you brought up just such an important point that organization is really a crucial piece and a key for success, those success cases.
You even used the word messy, because I can speak of when you're talking about, you going in the house. My niece's husband, his dad didn't believe in banks. So he had a couple of $100,000 in the house. And his brother always thought that he was the executor. And so when the father passed away, they were actually able to get the will. And so they're at the hospital, the family's at the hospital, but this one brother went back to the house and he found the will, found out he wasn't the executor, he wasn't getting anything. So he knew where all his cash was. So for the funeral, they blew over $75,000 on the funeral. And that was the cash that was part of the cash that was in the house. There was an antique sports car. Don't know what happened to the car. So as the executor, and if someone would say, you know what, this is the executor, and the paperwork is, in a brightly colored envelope, as the executor, go in and take care. Because a lot of times family members, they know mom and dad are gone and they want to go in the house and they just start taking stuff. It becomes a free-for-all. So as an executor, you got to go change the locks because people think they're entitled to something. Oh, mom said I could have this. Mom said I could have that, or dad. So you have to, again, manage people's expectations of how this is going to go, because as executor, you're the quarterback. You're running the show. You can't let other people start telling you what needs to be done or what they want. It doesn't matter what you want. You're the person that's in charge of the estate. You're the one that's going to be held liable for anything going forward. So you need to get a handle on that as quick as possible. So it's up to the testator saying, hey, something happens, you're in charge, look for the brightly colored envelope, the orange envelope, and start from there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it sounds like we've both seen those horror stories, right? Of everyone raiding the house. Breaks your heart when you see that. And it's kind of going back to where we started, where you were like, you don't quite know people until after death and needing to share an inheritance, and then everyone's entitled to everything. It's really sad when you see those situations.
And that's when I ended up writing the book, but it was probably the 6th or 7th time on our way to court, and I was sitting in court, and I remember it might have been it was an out-of-body experience, because I know my parents would be freaking out that the three of us were in court having this fight, and we're having 3 people, a judge and 2 lawyers, fight over the assets of which way it was supposed to go. And I remember sitting there going, I don't remember seeing any of these people at the table at Christmas. I don't know who these people are. How come they're getting to say what's going to happen to our family? I don't remember. And that's a lot of times people end up going to court because they figure if we just go to court, the judge will see, and that's how I felt at the time, they'll just see that the other side, they're idiots. Let me just get to court. But, going to court is not like like Law and Order. It's not over in 48 minutes.
No.
You need to figure out that you're willing to put up the time and you're willing to scratch the checks to the lawyers, because the lawyers are the ones that are going to take from the estate. This is where the money's going to come from. It's not going to come out of your pocket. It's going to come from the estate. So you need to figure out, how am I going to, as a testator, how am I going to alleviate this problem down the road so that my family doesn't end up in court?
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. I mean, I've definitely come in, unfortunately, I've had to come in and take over after there's like bad actors, or,
Right.
there's kind of situations like your family where no one's agreeing. There, was a family member that was involved. Maybe things, either didn't go according to plan. Sometimes money was stolen, but I've absolutely seen, attorney's fees be 6 figures, and it just breaks your heart, where it really can be, it can be different. It can be different. And that's so much of why we have podcasts, right? Is to have these conversations,
right.
and share with families. Clients that work with, go the professional route, a lot of them actually are just wanting to avoid that. They want a neutral party. But let's be honest, most people aren't going to work with a professional. Most people that are doing this work, it is non-professionals. It's family members. It's the children that are going
I have
to
no
do
idea.
this.
Yeah.
So I think that the more that we can equip our loved ones for, what the job actually is, but also what the wishes are, the more that it just gives peace of mind, and hopefully does leave a legacy of love, because, what your family went through, that's what we want to avoid.
There's so many people that it's a dirty little secret. A lot of families don't want to talk about it, but everybody's got a story. Everyone.
Yes.
And they think, oh, that won't happen to me. That won't happen to me. But everyone has a story. They know of people.
Well, and with the estate plan, it's right. It's our death, it's money, it's like all the taboo subjects. And then also, where we have to have conversations about our family, and everyone wants to avoid that. I think it's normal. Most people want to avoid that. I think that's where, like, leaning into that discomfort is just, it's really required to do that.
That was our biggest, where of anything where my family failed, is my parents didn't have the conversation with us. I mean, they came in our office, and I had our lawyer do the will, and my one sister, she same day, the other sibling, she wasn't there. She didn't know there was a will, but we always knew there was a will, and it was always going to be split 3 ways, because just because it's equal doesn't mean to be fair in some people's eyes. So, if my parents would just said, hey, everything is split 3 ways, and this is where it's going to go, I think that would alleviate the problem, because then nobody can come back and say, oh, I didn't know. But they never had the conversation with us, and that's where we ended up with the problem. So it always comes back down to conversations, but families don't have the conversations because they're afraid. They know there's one problem sibling, one problem child. So they think the easiest thing is not to say anything, so they won't upset them. Maybe as they get older, they don't want to say anything to upset them because they won't get to see the grandkids. It could be a myriad of things that they won't have these tough conversations. So what happens is they leave the paperwork to do the talking, and that's where the problems end up.
Yeah, that's so true. So let's touch on your book. It's called Executor Help, and it's really written to, I'm assuming executors and trustees, correct?
Yes, executors and people, the testators, people who are starting to want to set up their estate plan. They want to prepare. So it's for people who want to prepare and understand the pitfalls, what they need to do, how they choose an executor. I mean, the full book is called Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor, and Avoid Family Fights. So it's for the testator who's creating the estate plan. It's also for the executor. Let them understand the responsibilities, what needs to be done, what's going to be involved with the job, because 85-90% of most people who are stuck with the job, they have no idea. They don't know where to start. They don't know who to ask, what they need to do. So it's stories, part of my story, people's stories, client stories that I've come across, which fit into probably, a lot of the problems that people face today when it comes to getting things organized. And, at the back of the book, I have 50 executor questions that people have. Do I get paid? How do I get paid? What happens if I don't file the right tax return? Who do I talk to about accounting? Also, there's also 50 questions at the back of the book as well that most people are asking about what it means to be an executor.
That's so helpful. I love that. So I think, we just were talking about, the book and stories. So I think this kind of will go nicely into one of my last questions for you. We've touched upon a lot of, right, the nightmare stories, right? And I think both of us can share more of those, right? Of when
Right.
things didn't go
Absolutely.
well. But do you have any success stories to share, or any like client testimonials or administering a state where you were like, this was done well?
Yes. I recently was on a golf trip, and it came up at the dinner table. One of my friends, one of my clients, he talked about when his wife passed away, and they had everything all organized. And my first question to him was, how did the siblings react? And he says they were perfect. They waited. They understood, what it took to settle the estate. They didn't rush, and because the wife did leave some assets to her siblings, but they went through the steps. He was prepared as an executor. He knew where things were. He still was going through grief because he was at home, and he went to go to she wasn't feeling well, and she went up to go to sleep, just to have a nap, and he went upstairs and found her dead. And so he was still going through that, still traumatized from that. But at least they had conversations, and he understood what she wanted, where she wanted to be buried, all of those sort of things. And he was able to, still get over the grief, but still also do the business side that needs to be taken care of. And that's the toughest part, because the first chapter of my book is to deal with grief. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and it affects people in different ways. So you need to figure out, I need to get over the grief, take care of what I need to, because the grief is never going to go away. But then the next following chapters is about the business part, because that's not going to go away, but you have to get through it. You have to figure it out, how I'm going to get through it.
I love that you start there, because yeah, that's so true. And it's important to just know that, especially the family and the loved ones that are willing to step up to the plate and be named as, executor or trustee, of just acknowledging that's really going to be with you, as you're doing this job. Well, David, this has been a lot of fun. I've really loved this conversation. I've taken away a lot. What would you like to leave listeners with, especially the listeners that haven't started yet? What would be that one first step?
I think everybody needs to think about, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Because a legacy isn't what you leave people, but it's going to be how you leave them. And recently I had somebody say, your legacy, think of it like a movie credit. How do you want to be remembered? So you're gone, but you have those credits they did this, they did this, they did that. So it's your movie credit. So how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to remember leaving your family disorganized in chaos, or do you want to leave a legacy of love, or a legacy of love and order? See what I did there? I tied you in. See what I did?
Thanks for that, David.
Like that? So that's what you need to figure out. How do you want to be remembered, and how do you want to leave that legacy?
Well, we'll absolutely link to your book, The Executor Help. If people are interested in connecting with you, learning more.
Actually, just go to davidedey.com. Got free resources on there. You can click and download a checklist. What you need is an executor, whether you're in US or in Canada. I've got a legacy readiness quiz. You can just see where you stand in terms of creating your legacy and what you need to do. And you can buy the book there. There's a link to my podcast. There's videos, there's graphics, there's everything. Everything you need to know, just go to davidedey.com.
Great. And we'll link that in the show notes. David, thank you again. This has been so much fun.
It was a lot of fun. I hope we can do it again sometime down in the future. I really appreciate you having me on the show. And let's continue to create a legacy of love.
Oh, thank you.